Yesterday, I got to do something fun. I got to go out and shoot guns. And I went to the desert, in a canyon desert. I went with my brother Frank and my brother Kerry right here. And that's the first time I'd been. They'd been before, so they knew all about it. And they're trying to tell me, yeah, there's a lot of different stuff out there. Well, it's almost like a junkyard, almost, right? I mean, that's a lot of stuff to shoot, a lot of targets to shoot at, type of thing. And sure enough, we pull up, and there's this 50-plus inch TV, big screen TV that was just sitting there. And there was no bullets in it or anything. It was pure, right? And we're thinking, geez, are they going to take it back? Well, what do you do with that, right? Well, the temptation was too much, wasn't it, guys? And so Frank just couldn't wait, and he just had to start. It's true. It was like we turned into 12-year-old boys, okay? That's really what it was, wasn't it?
What station were you imagining on the TV?
I'm not going to say, okay? I'm not going to incriminate anybody or myself.
I heard a rumor that Frank thought the TV was a crow, so he took the opportunity to take it out.
Well, he did take out parts from that, right? Didn't you? He took out this big convex glass, and I went inside the parts of inside the TV, and there was like 3 of these things. And we shot up a couple of them, and he took out one of them, and he would just, from the sun, start taking burning holes, just like a 12-year-old. Okay.
Clean up all the debris.
It was fun. It was fun. Okay. All right. What does that have to do with our lesson? Nothing, except we are going to talk about a 12-year-old. Yes.
Just for the ladies to understand that inside every man is their inner boy. So don't be surprised when we act boyish.
We did. It was fun. Okay. All righty. Okay. All righty. We are going to talk about a 12-year-old boy. Now let's see. I can't even get order back. Okay. We're going to be in Luke 2. Okay, Luke 2, everybody thinks, oh, that's a Christmas story. But we're going to talk about a little something different here. We're going to start in Luke 2:41 and go to the end of the chapter here. And it's really the first time Jesus speaks. So there's a saying here that Jesus says that we're going to get into. But let's read through this. Let's start Luke 2:41. It starts out like this. Now his parents went to Jerusalem every year at the feast of the Passover. And when that's Jesus, and when he was 12 years old, they went up according to custom. And when the feast was ended, as they were returning, the boy Jesus stayed behind in Jerusalem. His parents did not know it, but supposing him to be in the group, they went a day's journey. But then they began to search for him among their relatives and acquaintances. And when they did not find him, they returned to Jerusalem, searching for him. After 3 days, they found him in the temple, sitting among the teachers, listening to them and asking them questions. And all who heard him were amazed at his understanding and his answers. And when his parents saw him, they were astonished. And his mother said to him, "Son, why have you treated us so? Behold, your father and I have been searching for you in great distress." And he said to them, "Why were you looking for me? Did you not know that I must be in my father's house?" And they did not understand the saying that he spoke to them. And he went down with them and came to Nazareth and was submissive to them. And his mother treasured up all these things in her heart. And Jesus increased in wisdom and in stature and in favor with God and man. So our verse here on verse 49, it's the only time that Jesus speaks. And so we're going to take a closer look at this. And I kind of think this is actually a hard saying that's going on here. And so I'm going to get into this a little bit. So it starts off in verse 41. It's helpful for us to understand the context of what's going on here. In 41, we see the parents going to Jerusalem. You already have a question already. Okay.
I'm curious, how could Jesus increase in God's favor?
Yeah, that's a great question too. So, guess what? I'm not going to quite get into that too much, okay? Just so you know, just a tiny bit, but not really get in fully into that. But I'm going to get back to that, okay? So, but follow along here. So, his parents, the parents are going to Jerusalem. They went to Jerusalem every year, it says, at the feast, the Passover. And so one of the first things I want you to understand, and we've got to get the slide up here, and that's the wrong one. Okay? You hit escape, maybe? Okay, we need the technical people up here to do this. Hey, I apologize that this one's not working. We've really had technical difficulties on this one. Yeah, so sorry about that. We're going to try to do better next week and get this one working. So
That's what you have to shoot straight.
yeah, okay, well, not us doing that. Okay, so okay, ready? Obedient or disobedient? There's the verses. Okay? So let's talk about, first of all, so you understand the feast of the Lord, and because this can be confusing, but I think it's helpful for us to understand in terms of these feasts. It's not like our Thanksgiving feast, okay? A little bit different. It's more like a festival. And so there's three main feasts in terms of that God had required the Israelites to go to, okay? And this idea of the going to these feasts or festivals, however you want to say it, it really was to bring the nation Israel together as one, united, okay, and to worship before God. So that's the idea. That's the big idea surrounding this. Now, I know we have Thanksgiving, and we come together as families maybe in Thanksgiving, but what we don't do is really come together as one church here. You notice that, right? But they did. They came together in a festival, okay? And that's the idea of oneness. And so God's requiring them to come together in terms of this feast. And there's three of them. The first one's the Feast of the Passover, and that's Leviticus 23, 4 through 5. That says, "These are the appointed feasts of the Lord, the holy convocations, which you shall proclaim at the time appointed for them. In the first month, on the 14th day of the month at twilight, is the Lord's Passover." And Deuteronomy also says similar, but it adds a little bit more information for us. That's Deuteronomy 16, the first two verses. "Observe the month of Abib and keep the Passover to the Lord your God. For in the month of Abib, the Lord your God brought you out of Egypt by night. And you shall offer the Passover sacrifice to the Lord your God from the flock or the herd at the place that the Lord will choose to make his name dwell there." Well, that place ended up being Jerusalem, the temple, okay? And so that's what this Passover. Now the Passover was one day. Okay? I just want so that we're clear. The celebrating the actual Passover was one particular day. On a specific day they were to come and celebrate and worship and bring their offerings, okay, because God brought them out of Egypt. So that's basically what's happened there. Okay? Now, following the Passover was the Feast of Unleavened Bread. That's a 7-day festival. So we have the Passover one day, and then the next morning is the Feast of Unleavened Bread that goes for 7 days. So that's what's happening here, and that's also Leviticus 23, starting verse 6. On the 15th day, Of the same month, the feast of unleavened bread to the Lord. For 7 days you shall eat unleavened bread. On the first day you shall have a holy convocation. You shall not do any ordinary work, but you shall present a food offering to the Lord for 7 days. On the seventh day is a holy convocation. You should not do any ordinary work. So we have the unleavened bread, and that's really what that was, is to commemorate their hasty exit out of Egypt, okay? That was the idea, to their hasty flight out of Egypt. And that's what they were commemorating in terms of this unleavened bread. Okay, and so this Passover and unleavened bread were all put together as an 8-day period, and they just called it Passover. And that's what Joseph and Mary are attending here. So when you read that Passover, it's really both of these together. Okay, that's what's happened. Okay, two more feasts that God's required. The feast lasted 7 days, unleavened bread, and then the entire period was called Passover. Okay, so the second feast is called Pentecost, or a Feast of Weeks, and so Pentecost, that means 50th. It represents 50 days. 50 days after the second day of the Feast of Unleavened Bread. That's what that means, okay? And so that's what that is, and that's also in Leviticus 23, 15, and 16. You shall count 7 full weeks from the day after the Sabbath, from the day that you brought the sheaf of the wave offering. You shall count 50 days to the day after the 7th Sabbath. Then you shall present a grain offering of new grain. So that's the second type of major feast. And then there's so this was to give thanks for the new harvest. That was the idea of this Pentecost, and the harvest began. The harvest began right after Passover. So that's what they're celebrating there. So Passover, then we have the Pentecost, and then we have one more, the third one, and that's the Feast of Ingathering. Everybody get this? I know you guys are having a hard time seeing that. I'm sorry. So everybody get that? This was a festival of thanks for the harvest, and the harvest began right after Passover. Okay? Yep. Good? Okay?
So that's really 58 days then in a row.
Yeah. Well, no. There's a 50-day period where they don't have to be there, and then they come back.
So the 8 days of Pentecost.
And then they're no longer, the Passover and unleavened bread, it's 8 days. Then they go home, and then they're come back after 50 days. Do you see that? That's what. So this is for giving thanks for planting there, okay? It's not. Yeah, so that's the idea. And then we have the ingathering. That's giving thanks for gathering the fruits, okay? So the feast to celebrate the gathering of all the fruits. And that's in, 23, 39 through 43. So it talks about the 15th day of the 7th month, when you've gathered in the produce of the land. You shall celebrate the feast of the Lord 7 days, so on and so forth. So basically, that's the idea, is they gathered these things in. Now, it's also called the Feast of Tabernacles. You've heard tabernacles maybe, and you haven't maybe not heard in gathering, or you've heard the booths. Those are the same thing. And the reason why is because as we get down into these verses, towards the end, it says, I think in verse 42, you shall dwell in booths for 7 days. Or tabernacles for 7 days. That's why they call it tabernacles or booths. So all native Israelites shall dwell in booths, that your generations may know that I made the people of Israel dwell in booths when I brought them out of the land of Egypt. And that's why we have this. So God required, people to make their huts or booths or tabernacles out of the sticks and whatnot, and the leaves and whatnot. And that's what they did. Okay, and so that's what that's called. They celebrated that type of thing. Yeah. Yes.
I'm just kind of curious if the word booth has any kind of reference back to Hebrew for the word tent. Is that?
Yes. Yeah, they're making a tent, tabernacle.
Okay.
That's what the tabernacle is, a big tent. Okay, that's the whole idea. So all male adults were required by God, okay, to go present to the temple their offering. And that's in Deuteronomy 16, verse 16, 3 times a year. 3 times a year, and we just went through those 3. All your males shall appear before the Lord your God at the place that he will choose. That's temple in Jerusalem here now. At the feast of unleavened bread, at the feast of weeks, and at the feast of booths. They shall not appear before the Lord empty-handed. Every man shall give as he is able according to the blessing the Lord your God has given you. So not only do they're required to appear, they can't go empty-handed. Yeah. So here's what's interesting is they didn't do these things fully. That's what's so interesting to me is, the rabbis would write about these things, and I think that a lot of times the Israelites just chose one to make the trip, okay, to Jerusalem, and in a lot of cases we're talking about, let me get these down. A lot of cases we're talking about, choosing one particular one, and they chose the Passover. But here, the males were required, okay, the adult males. So the women and children were not required, although they could go. It's not a problem. As a matter of fact, they were encouraged to go. It was more of a social type of activity for them to go to this festival. That's what this was like, and that's what Joseph and Mary were experiencing here. They went as a whole family. The whole family went. That's what the idea with the custom was. Okay, but interesting. Joseph and Mary, they traveled about 60 to 70 miles to go to Jerusalem. I think it's like 61, 62 miles if it's just a straight line, but of course it's not, and so it's somewhere in that neighborhood. It can be unsafe for a person to travel on those roads, so they would go in a caravan or a group of people. That's how they would go. And so there'd be lots of people going, and as they went, they would sing songs from Psalms. That's what they did. Okay? And so in Psalms, when you say, going up to Jerusalem, they'd be singing about that. Okay? So that's the idea. That's the background. That's what we're talking about in terms of these feasts to the Lord. And here in Luke 2, they're doing this according to their custom, that sort of thing. And then we get into verse 42, and it says that Jesus was 12 years old in verse 42 at the time of this event. I don't know if he had gone previously. Couldn't tell you. Probably, but I really don't know. But I know, is there something to being 12 years old? I mean, what's the significance of being 12 years old, right? Well, the Jewish rabbis and scholars said at the age of 12 that a boy became known as the son of the law. What exactly does that mean? What do you mean, the son of the law? And so Jesus at that age, started, or any boy at age 12 was supposed to receive instruction, was supposed to receive training. And so that's what happened at age 12. And this is what the rabbis had wrote. Now, somebody mentioned bar mitzvah. Okay? So at the time of Jesus, they didn't have or use that term, or didn't have a bar mitzvah celebration. It just didn't exist. Sometime after the time of Jesus, it came about, but not during Jesus' time. So bar mitzvah is age 13 nowadays. Okay? And so there's a distinction here between age 12 in terms of, okay, now it's time to receive this instruction and training, okay, versus the age 13. So at age 13 nowadays with the bar mitzvah, this training leads to the age of responsibility, okay, for what? Well, they're responsible to keep the law. And so that's what we have today in terms of a bar mitzvah, age 13. They're now showing that they can keep the law, that they can do things like read the law. So we have this bar mitzvah celebration. It's certainly, I've been to one, so I know that there is in the synagogue, there's reading of the Torah, reading out of the prophet, and then certain other things I don't quite totally understand, and then there's a celebration afterwards, a party afterwards, okay? But the idea is that they've become at the age of being responsible, and they're now responsible to keep the law. But I would tell you, they're not necessarily considered a man, an adult. Let's just put it that way, okay? Even though they're responsible to keep the law, and they're at the age of responsibility, they're not really a fully adult. And I'm not sure what age really is an adult, but I'm going to tell you this, that in Numbers chapter 1, the very first 3 verses, God tells Moses, take a census of the males age 20 and older. So that gives us kind of an idea that it's, an adult male is probably age 20 and older. Okay? So certainly Jesus at age 12 would not be considered an adult. Got it? Okay, he's still a boy and child.
It just occurs to me that the Lutherans have in 8th grade, they have...
Confirmation.
Yeah, and that's about the same age. They started probably studying at 12 and
Yep.
they confirmed adulthood.
Yeah, they just didn't make that up. They did not make that up. Guess where they got it from? You see? So that's where that a lot of stuff is coming from. So Jesus is not yet there in terms of that, but they fully expect him as a 12-year-old to be going with everybody to the Passover, to the Feast of Unleavened Bread, to these feasts, okay? That was part of it. That's the context surrounding that. Okay, but he's not necessarily considered a full-on adult male type of thing. And so where we get into the issue of our passage here is this part here, the actions of Jesus and his parents in verse 43. So verse 43 says, and when the feast was ended, as they were returning, the boy Jesus stayed behind in Jerusalem. His parents did not know it. This is where we get into a little bit of an issue. So the feast is like 8 days long, okay? To me, what it's saying is, okay, well, when it ended, the parents, they left. That's what they would normally do. They're going back to Nazareth in this big caravan, okay? And Jesus stayed behind while they're traveling on, okay? And in verse 44, it tells us that they just presumed or assumed that he was with them in this groups of people. And so how I understand how they would travel is the women would kind of lead the way along with the smaller children, and the men and the older children would be in the back. This is how they would travel. And so they just assumed that Jesus was, his mother probably assumed Jesus was back there somewhere with this group of people. You got the picture? So they are traveling back home. But here it says Jesus stayed behind in Jerusalem. Now I'm going to tell you that word stayed, just a little bit of Greek. It's aorist tense, active. And that just basically means one time with intent. Okay? And so it's hard for the translators to really put that in here, but that's what that means, is he intentionally stayed behind. Is there a problem? Here's what I'm going to ask you. Okay, Jesus, he's not with the caravan, so, why did Joseph and Mary take off without really knowing, if Jesus was with them? They just trusted?
Never had a problem with them. I can tell you.
Why did Jesus deliberately stay behind?
Because it was an opportunity. It was an opportunity for him to learn from the teachers that were gathered in Jerusalem for that event.
Ooh, okay. Come on up here. Let's start teaching it. Do you think he was being disobedient to them?
No.
Oh, not at all?
I'll say no.
Bending to God's will.
Do you think that Jesus did not know that his parents and the rest of the caravan were leaving?
As a dad, I wish he told me.
He was obedient.
Do you think his parents just didn't tell him? Okay, we're leaving? Do you think they told him?
Not in the text. We don't know.
So the command in Exodus 20, verse 12, is honor your father and mother. Right? That's the command. It flat out says it. Okay? Do you think that the command didn't apply to him? Do you have an issue with him staying behind and them taking off? You don't have an issue? How many of you would do that to your children? Oh, wait a second. Now I don't see the hands. You're saying it's all okay, and now all of a sudden you don't want to say it's okay. Ha, I get it.
It's a different time.
Oh, it's a different time. What do you do with this?
Well, they didn't know.
Okay, hold on.
Well, so Jesus had to fulfill all the law.
Oh,
That
okay.
meant that he did honor his father and his mother, and yet at the same time, I just lost my thought. So he fulfilled the law. So he couldn't, and he was sinless, so he couldn't have been disobedient either. So those two things have to be true. They are true. That
You're not solving the problem yet.
I don't see a problem.
Oh, you don't see a problem. He doesn't see a problem. Okay, tell me, really, how many of you would take off without your children? Without your 12-year-old?
They didn't know.
Okay. Okay, we got an answer.
Bobby told us last week that the commands were for the adults.
Ooh, the commands are for the adults. So, nothing what I told you here about turning at the age of responsibility or being instructed is not for him. He can disregard it. Wow. Okay.
Traveling across country, and we left my little sister
On purpose?
She wasn't.
On purpose.
Nobody knew. We left
Okay.
her, right? But she wasn't at fault. Right?
Right, nobody knew. Right. Okay, so. Okay. I've already got these points. We already did that. Jesus, was Jesus acting in disobedience? And you're saying no, right? Okay. So let's go through some of these with your answers you're giving me. I want to go through these, okay? Because you're throwing out some answers for potential answers. So let's go through them, okay? So that first one, okay, his parents simply failed to tell him that they were leaving, right? Well, I have down here Luke 6 through 8, and the reason why I put that down here is it's not just one-sided. It's his parents and Jesus, okay? Well, what about Jesus? Did he know? So, did he have knowledge and understanding? Well, It's in the Bible that he has knowledge. Okay? Not necessarily directly in this passage. Okay?
I think since every year, the family going up to Jerusalem for that Passover, so the children, they've been training from them. Young
Yeah.
age, all the way up, 12 years training, every year going up and down, so he's supposed to.
He should have known, right? Yeah, and that's a normal human thing that he should have known, right?
But you said that you don't really go into your 12.
No, I didn't say that. That's when the training and instruction begins at age 12. Okay? Training and instruction in what? In the law. They were not, women and children were not required to go. However, they often went. Okay? And matter of fact, the rabbis and the Jewish leaders encouraged the family to go. They didn't make it an absolute requirement or anything like that. They just knew that from the law that the male adult was required to present himself before the Lord 3 times a year, but the family went because it was a festival celebrating God.
So, but it says he went and he wasn't intentional in staying back.
Yes.
He's drawing the line between his earthly parents and
Yes. He is drawing a line. There's no question about that. Yes.
he says he's in my father's house.
Isn't his answer, his mindset come up in his answer to his parents about where he was supposed to be, was his father's house?
Yeah, we're going to get into that. That's exactly what she's saying too. She's saying the same thing. We're going to get into that. He's drawing a line here, okay? Do you have a problem with that? You should. Why? Well, what happened to honor your father and mother? Okay? Do you see that there's still a problem here? Yes, I understand he's intentionally doing this, and he's making a distinction here, but you still got a problem with this. Okay? So I want to bring these out. So the Luke 6 passage tells us, oh yeah, he knew what's in the heart. Okay? And so you would have to say something like, well, okay, he knew what was in the heart of people, but that's when he was an adult, not when he was 12 years old. Oh, really? I mean, some people come up with that argument and say, well, he didn't have it when he was 12 years old. So we're going to address that. I think that's in my third point. But the second point here is Jesus was completely innocent, and he did not have omniscience at this age.
Well, that contradicts his statement saying, I must be about my father's business.
Yeah, it does, doesn't it? Let alone Psalm 139, let alone Colossians 1, 15 and 16. Yeah, it becomes a problem when we say stuff like that. Well, then, I mean, how is it that he created before we even see him as a babe? How does that happen? And all of a sudden we get rid of that and know he's just a human being here? So what theologians have said is Jesus is both fully God and fully man. Not just man, baby, growing up, getting older, learning, and all of a sudden he's God. No, it's fully God, fully man, right from the very get-go, right from the very beginning. They call this the hypostatic union, and I have to tell you, I don't fully understand it. I just have to accept it by faith. I'm just telling you, I've read a lot about it, and I'm just still don't understand it.
How do we rectify that with verse 40? It says, and the child grew and became strong,
Yes.
filled with wisdom,
Yes.
and the favor of God.
Yes.
How do you grow?
Yeah. Well, you grow physically, and there's no question about that. Okay? You grow physically. We all do.
Grow in wisdom.
Didn't I just tell you we're 100% man and 100% God? Right? Can you grow as the man? Of course you can. There's no question about that. Do I fully understand that? No. I don't. I already told you. I don't fully understand how that.
So the word filled with wisdom, he was always filled with wisdom.
As God, he already knew it. There's no question in my mind, he already knew it. But as a man, you're able to grow, yes. As my good friend Andy Schaus says,
Well, yeah,
look, God never learned.
Yeah, I wasn't
Okay?
hung up on like growing physically. I was hung up on
God growing, no, doesn't happen.
the wisdom.
Okay?
But what about the Holy Spirit being on him when he was baptized?
Yeah.
Or
Well,
was the Spirit
He
always in him?
divested himself.
wait a second. It was before he was baptized,
Right, so I'm saying
at conception.
the Holy Spirit was on him.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, so it goes even back further, right? Yeah, and so baptized as an adult male, okay? Yes.
So could you say that because he was 100% God, he added this 100% humanity to it at birth and then willingly set aside some aspects of his omniscience because of his humanity?
Otherwise, he could do with the Father.
Yeah, like,
Okay, so
which would justify him not knowing the date and time of his return?
yeah, so that's that third point. Jesus set aside some of his attributes, and I have the Philippians 2, right, 6 and 7. That's what your guys are bringing up, okay? So Philippians 2, 6 and 7, who though he was in the form of God, did not count equality with God a thing to be grasped, but emptied himself by taking the form of a servant, being born in the likeness of men. That's a hard saying. Paul brings that up. It's a hard saying. I acknowledge it right away. To me, this is what that scripture that is telling us, that he emptied his power. Okay? Hold on a second. And so Jesus is in the form of God, full deity, of course, full humanity, but full deity all the time. Okay? And he divests himself, which means he divested himself of the glories of his deity. So in other words, at the point he's being born, white bright light everywhere type of thing, all the time, to the point where you just are blinded and have to bow down. Okay? That's what I mean. He divested himself of that glory. That's how I read that. I also read that he chose which of his attributes to use. That's how I understand when we read something like this in Philippians. That's what it's telling me. But what he didn't do is he didn't exchange his deity for humanity. He did not. He still had it. You see? So he's not exchanging his deity for humanity. He still has it, but he is submitting to God the Father's will by doing this. So let's see. Go ahead, Andy.
To answer a question on the Holy Spirit, when he was baptized and descended on him as a dove, I mean, it's clear in Scripture that he said, Father and I are one. I believe the physical descent was a physical sign of that. That it wasn't that he didn't have the Holy Spirit. How can you separate the Godhead?
Yep.
So, I mean, that's where some people get hung up. That he didn't have the Holy Spirit before he descended. I don't believe that. I think it was a physical act. At the same time, God says, what? This is my son who I'm well pleased. So it was a physical act of that sign, but
Yes.
I don't believe he was
Yeah.
void of the Holy Spirit before that.
All right. So when I look at this one, Jesus set aside his divine attributes. He didn't set aside his divine attributes. He may have chose not to exercise them. I got that. Okay? And he didn't bring out his attributes in such a way that, we see his glory. Okay? That's how I understand that Philippians verse. How about this one? What Jesus did was not really a bad thing. I don't like that one at all. Okay? So, no, the reason why I say that really is because his mother's response in verse 48. And so his mother's response in verse 48, she says this. She says, mother said to him, Son, why have you treated us so? Behold, your father and I have been searching for you in great distress. Okay? So do you know what that great distress means? It means to suffer pain. Okay? That's the idea. Suffer pain. It means torment, anguish. It's kind of a normal reaction of a parent losing their child. That's what we're talking about. Okay? And so that's what she's feeling. That's a normal human reaction type of thing. And how about the commandment in Exodus 20:12 doesn't apply to Jesus? No, I think it applies to Jesus. I have Matthew 5:17. Matthew 5:17 says, just Jesus speaking. It says, "Do not think that I have come to abolish the law or the prophets. I have not come to abolish them, but to fulfill them." So he filled the law by obeying the law perfectly. He fulfilled the prophets by being the Messiah. He's fulfilling the law and the prophets there. Okay? So I don't think that's it. Number 6, Jesus couldn't have been disobedient because he was sinless, perfectly fulfilling the law and the prophets. Now we got the right answer. Okay? As you guys have said. We're at the right point here, and there's several different verses that tells us he was without sin, that sort of thing. Even in the Old Testament. I just gave you one on Isaiah. Okay? And so all of those verses tell us he's without sin. He's fulfilling the law and the prophets. Okay? But it doesn't help us reconcile this yet. Okay?
Do you think his parents, and I guess we only hear from his mother, were that kind of low key? I mean, they didn't rant, they didn't, list all the grief and all the problems they had, and all the worries. Just that one word. I mean, do you think that's understated here, or that they knew that they were talking to God?
Oh, I don't know. Good question. Go ahead.
Well, I think a woman in those times wouldn't have spoken up in the temple unless she was under great distress.
Yes.
So she probably wouldn't go into great distress.
I agree with you on that, 100%. Oh, yes. Okay?
Wouldn't the reason that she was in great distress because she misunderstood what Jesus is doing?
Do you think she was thinking she misunderstood?
No.
Okay.
But because she misunderstood, that's why she was under great.
Oh, yes. Yeah. Yeah. I agree with that, yes.
I agree with number 6, but I'm going to push back for understanding.
Yes. That's what I'm trying to get you guys to the point of saying, look, this is... Okay, I agree with that, but that doesn't reconcile what this passage is saying.
So it seems like we're saying circular reasoning. He's not sinning because he's sinless. You can't use, in regular society, we can't go ahead and do that kind of reasoning. He's sinless because he didn't sin because he's sinless. That's circular reasoning, and it happens in the media all the time. So I want to come to some other understanding of this. I'm not disagreeing with it, but I want to understand it.
Well, he was tempted yet without sin. Peter says he committed no sin. Neither was there deceit found in his mouth, which is just amazing to me. But that's who he is. Scripture's trying to show us who he is. Okay? Whether it's circular reasoning to you or not, the issue is, who is Jesus?
We have to understand who wrote this, too. Luke, as far as I know, is the only Gentile in the Bible that wrote something. That's what commentary will say about it. And so he's recording this off of other witnesses' accounts, other documentation. And so some of this stuff is left out that we don't know. And I think this is healthy for us to have these kind of discussions. It says we're supposed to ponder the Word of God. We're supposed to really give it thought.
I agree. You're right. Okay, so you see why I think this is a hard saying here? Yeah. Okay, so let's get in. Okay, we got more. Go ahead.
One thought is that maybe this causes us to think of what really honoring our parents. Because we tend to think of great distress as dishonoring. Now, for us, we would consider our children dishonoring us because they usually sin. So, if our children got into drugs or were thieves,
whatever it is,
that would be dishonoring to us. Jesus didn't do that. So I think that what he did with his parents was dishonoring. And just at the time where he is at the temple, he's making that turn. So his statement is that I must be at my Father's house. So he's actually made that crossover from his earthly parents to his heavenly parents. But he wasn't dishonoring it to them. So causing your parents, as parents, we may feel that's dishonoring. It's not dishonoring because it wasn't that he was sinning against them.
Maybe. Okay. I can follow the reasoning there. I still think it's dishonoring. I mean, what would you say if he didn't go to the feast at all and they said, come along, we're going. And he said, no, I'm not going to go. Oh, yeah. That really highlights it then. You see?
Well, that would be disobedient.
Yeah. Well, now he's saying, no, I'm not going to go with you back. I'm going to be in here. Do you see that? So that's a problem, I think.
All the translations say intentional.
No.
Are we putting?
No, stayed.
Okay. Because if it's just stayed, maybe he was just where he was.
No. The Greek tense indicates that it was on purpose stayed. Okay, that's what I'm trying to tell you.
In verse 44, it says, but supposing him to be in the group. The word supposing refers to assuming by customary.
Yes.
In other words, they didn't tell him to come, let's go. It was customary that the children followed. So he's not disobeying his parents. He just stayed back. There was no command to him to follow, come with us now. There was no disobedience there because it was customary that they just followed. There was no command to follow. So he's not being disobedient.
Okay, now I'm not going to be able to get to the end here, okay? So what I want to do is look, what did Jesus do? And I think there's a key here, okay? What Jesus was actually doing. So his parents find him in the temple, and in verse 46, it says, after 3 days they found him in the temple. He's sitting among the teachers, listening to them, and asking them questions. So the teachers were the rabbis, the Pharisees, and so on and so forth. And I'm going to fast forward and show you a picture of a temple here. Maybe I'm not. Okay, so I forgot to leave it in here. So he's sitting in the temple, okay? Oops. Okay, and he's listening and asking questions. He's answering questions. Verse 47 gives us that. Okay, with the Pharisees, and they were amazed. And basically, it's like a teaching session. They normally only did this a couple of times in terms of the rabbis or the teachers coming out and teaching the students. And this was a situation whereby the students could ask questions. And so not only was Jesus maybe answering questions, he was he was answering and giving them answers to the point where they were amazed, which kind of tells you they didn't know the question he was asking them. And they were learning something new. It was flipped. Okay? Did you have a question, Steve? Oh, okay. Thought you did. Okay? So that's what's taking place here. Okay? And that's really, actually verse 46 is right in the middle of this passage. It's the focal point of everything here. And I think that's the key for us because the focus of this whole passage isn't on his parents, isn't on the Passover, isn't on the teachers, or where he went and where they went, or the fact that they left or anything. The focus is really on who he is. Okay? In terms of what and that's what I think is Luke is telling us. Not about parents or Passover or teachers or the temple even. It's rest with Jesus, establishing who he is. So this question and answering that they're going through, that's not like a child's game. It's not play here. Okay? This was a real life here. It's not a school session because it tells us in this section that Jesus had understanding at the age of 12. Now, I'm not talking about, he understood this part or this thing. No, he had understanding of everything at age 12, full. Okay? Do you see that? More than the teachers sitting there, the rabbis, the Pharisees, combined. And then some. Way more. He had the full understanding. So this is not like a school session. So Scott teaches school. He knows about those kids, and you can run circles around them easily when you teach kids. Oh, they tell you that. This is a whole different situation with Jesus sitting here. Okay? And this helps to explain that intent, that he was doing this on purpose. Do you see that? How this is starting to come around here? And then so all were amazed. Okay? The focal point is Jesus. Okay? To fill in your answers here. And then we get into what he said here. And then Jesus is establishing who he is, complete understanding. So the confrontation takes place in verses 48 and 49. Okay, and I say a confrontation and then a response. So Mary, she gives a loving rebuke to her son. Okay, she includes in that statement Joseph as his father. Right? And did you notice? Compare his father in verse 48 to verse 49. What's the difference here? What do the editors want to tell you? The people who wrote the English version of this Bible, what do they want to tell you? What does Luke want to tell you? Yeah. My father versus, your father. Yeah, you need to pick up on that. So Jesus is saying, no, that's not my father. My father's here at the temple. Do you see what's happening here? Focuses in on him and who he is. And Luke wants to show us that. Okay? Why were you looking for me? Did you not know that I must be in my Father's house? Yeah. So, Joseph and Mary, that was a normal reaction for them. Okay? She gives that loving rebuke, refers to your father and I, but Jesus responds in a respectful but astonishing type of reply. Okay? And there's lots of things I think that I might have said that I wouldn't have said this. I would have probably be defending myself. That's what I would be doing. And why would I be defending myself? Because I'm thinking about that punishment, yes. That's exactly what I've been going through. But here, he says, did you not know? And by the way, that you, that's in plural. That's a plural form, meaning Mary and Joseph. Just so you know, did you not know? Don't you remember the angel Gabriel and what he said? Or how about, when she visited Elizabeth before she had the child, your relative? That greeting Elizabeth gave and what took place there in the Holy Spirit? Wow. Or don't you remember the angels and the heavenly host that the shepherds told you about? Don't you remember the wise men when they showed up? Or in the dream, Joseph had the dream and the angel told him, flee to Egypt? I got all these. Don't you remember Simeon in the temple? And what he said? Or Anna the prophetess? There's all of these things, yeah.
Actually, John 7:15 to 18 pretty much sums it all up.
What does that say?
Want to read? Yeah, probably.
I don't have it in front of me.
It says, and the Jews marveled, saying, how does this man know letters, having never studied, talked about in the temple? Jesus answered them and said, my doctrine is not mine, but his who sent me. If anyone wants to do his will, he shall know concerning the doctrine, whether it is from God or whether it is from whether I speak on my own authority.
Yeah.
He who speaks from himself seeks his own glory, but he who seeks his own glory of the one who sent him is true, and has no unrighteousness in him. Excuse me?
John 7, 15 through 18.
15, 18.
Okay, John 7, 15 through 18. So,
Kirk, this may be a little bit picky of me, but I think it was kind of pretend astonishment, because he's not surprised by anything. So when I say to my students, don't you remember this? I'm not surprised that they didn't remember. I'm not at all surprised that they forgot that. I knew it. I'm trained as he trained me to expect things. So his was a pretend astonishment.
and still be respectful, right?
Yes.
Yes. Okay. So, I listed all those out. Huh? Yep, there we go. You have them down on your handout there. But Jesus, he's affirming his sonship, his divine sonship is what he's doing here. Okay? That God and the Father and his mission to do the will of the Father. This is what's happening here when he makes this, statement that I must be in my Father's house. Okay? And he's stating this as to who he is. Okay? And I think that that's important for us to understand. And I think his words also, they kind of function in such a way to distance himself from his parents, from Mary, and also from Joseph, in the sense that his real parent is God the Father. Okay? And he's making that clear, and he's distancing himself from that. And so he's showing this as to who he is. So he's honoring really his Father in heaven is what he's doing. Okay? And that's what we need to understand here. He's aligning himself up. He's aligning himself up with God's purpose. Okay? That's what it is. And then that last point here, the family claims do not take precedent over God's purposes. Okay? See, that's what... so I read this whole section, that one saying that he said, it's really this whole section in terms of me understanding, he's telling us who he is. And that he's aligned with God's purpose, God's mission is being given to him. Okay? Now, does he go on and be obedient to them and follow them back to Nazareth? He does. And does the Scripture say he even grows in wisdom and stature? And we just talked a little bit about that because of being fully God and fully man. There is some amount of growth. But as you go through, we got to finish here, but as you go through Scripture, this is the type of thing that you should really be thinking about is, what does this have to do or say about Jesus? That's really the whole point here. We can get off track on a lot of things, but if we keep in mind, what does this have to do with God, and what does this say about Him? Okay? And this is a kind of a prime example of that. It's a kind of a difficult thing to deal with, but yet this really is speaking to whom Jesus' Father is, God the Father, and it's telling us that He has a purpose and will, and we're going to see that throughout all the Gospels. He is constantly going to God the Father, isn't He? In prayer. He's constantly saying it to people, that He says what God the Father tells Him to say. Okay? He does what God the Father tells Him to do. And so on forth. And that's a theme that carries on. And that's verse 49, what He's telling His mother Mary. And by the way, it wasn't just Mary, it was the teachers that are sitting there. So this happened right there. He's telling them, this is who I am. I have God the Father. This is His house. Okay? This is where He's dwelling. And it's right here. And He's letting them know. And when you put it into that perspective, those other things are just minor. There's not really much of a point to them at all. Because that's the issue here. Yeah. Answer the question, was He obedient? Yep. To God the Father He was. Absolutely.